I always work in the context of the family. And I want to introduce the amazing Christopher Gauthier, whose work you know very well if you are sitting in the audience here. It's just such a privilege to be sitting in front of his work. So Chris.
Hi there. Obviously, he said who I am. It's pronounced either Gauthier or Gauthier. I will listen to either one. It doesn't matter. Or go, hey, you, Chris, and I still respond. My wife, if she wants, can call in again. Just marriage and family, right? I expected that. I teach up at Utah State University. I'm a professor of art and photography, and I am originally from Kansas City.
All right, so I think the way to do this is I'm going to ask Chris some stuff about his life. We did a radio show together not that long ago, and you can actually pick up the podcast off of iTunes under my name. I think it's under my name, and it's on the Coffee Klatch Radio Network. But I'm going to ask some of the things that I asked that night, and then we'll just go into all different areas of challenges for families and relationship particularly. And if you have questions, I actually think it would be really useful if you wanted to ask the questions. You could ask them in the middle of this. You don't have to wait. So if you want to raise your hand, I will run down and give you a microphone, and you can ask the question, and we'll try to deal with it, in vivo. We'll go right with it. It seems to me, Chris, that when we're talking about autism and relationship and family, we're really talking, in your case and probably in a lot of other people's cases, about two different things. So we're talking about people who are identified on the spectrum, who are raising children who may or may not be on the spectrum, but we're also talking about what trying to raise an exceptional child might mean for a marriage and a relationship. And in your case, I know you have both of those circumstances in play all the time. So maybe you want to just start to talk about your experience, and then maybe we can branch into those two things separately.
Yeah. What I've been seeing happening as I've been traveling around doing these photographs and talking to people is a significant proportion of parents don't realize that one or both are on the spectrum or might potentially be on the spectrum until they have a child who is. And then you start sitting back and you start looking at and examining all of your family history, which is really an enlightening process. Now, that doesn't mean that your parents or your siblings or your grandparents or your aunts and uncles are going to recognize it or accept it. That's fine. Really, the freedom point is that you come to that, on your own, and whether you seek a diagnosis or not really is not important. But the big part is creating a language that you have a relationship with your spouse with, and you have a language with your child with. That language is similar.
So you, from your position, you think that maybe people should take a look and actually say, I wonder why I'm behaving this way. So you went and did that at some point. And can you talk about how that actually changed the way that you were relating to either your partner or your kids, or just how it changed the context of what you were doing that supported or maybe challenged the family?
Yeah, I would say that I had a leg up on it because as an artist, I'm trained to constantly, internally and externally reflect. I mean, that is drilled into you. And so looking at one's motivation for one's actions is a constant part of our training system. But yeah, it did make a difference. I can talk to my kids about my own experience from being a child and also reflect to them that their experience is different but similar. It did soften my relationship with my wife quite a bit. Suddenly she could put all of what was going on in context. I could put my own childhood in context, and in some ways to rest. The ghosts of my own past suddenly were in focus. They were no longer these fuzzy things. I mean, the analogy is like you've walked around your entire life with no glasses on. Everything seems fine, and then suddenly somebody puts glasses on, and you can see, as my daughter learned, but because she got glasses this year, there are these lines in the leaves of the trees. Those are really beautiful, Dad. They were the veins of the leaves, right? She'd never seen them in her entire life. I had never seen the veins of my life.
So I want to go back. You said soften, right? So the diagnosis somehow allowed you to soften the relationship. So I guess this is a two-part question. One of the first part of the question is, what do you mean by soften? And the second part, I guess, is something that then we can really talk about, and that is softening the relationship one of the integral things that we should really talk about if we're going to talk about how to support families and how to help them to deal with stressful situations?
I'll answer the second one first. I think under stress, gentleness, peace of heart, peace of mind is really, really key to being able to survive together. If everything is stressed out, look at the animals out there in the world. If an animal is stressed, if another animal bumps into it, it's going to whip around and bite it, right? Human beings are animals. It's the hubris of exactly who and what we are. So being more gentle, being more conscious, being more aware of your actions, having grace and forgiveness for your partner and your loved ones in any state, whether you have autism or you don't, is going to be really helpful and quite healthy. Now I forgot the first part of the question.
Well, the first part was you said that you were actually able to soften. And so can you sort of characterize what not knowing meant and how knowing suddenly came to change it in a way that you described as softening?
Yeah, well, obviously my wife and I are a little on the different side of things. We're extremely full throttle, I wouldn't say extremely volatile, but we are definitely passionate, hot-tempered, full-on people. My parents one year, I think we were 5 years into our marriage, my parents gave us these Matchbox cars, but they were two bulldozers. And the joke was that my wife and I are two bulldozers in a field, and God forbid the fool who gets between us. That's us. And so learning to put bumpers on was really great for us, but it was also good because the little bulldozers we produced are slamming into us too. So the bumpers come in pretty handy there.
Well, at the risk of becoming the person between the two bulldozers, which I think I'm actually at risk for right at this second, because I know Chris's wife very well, one of my favorite people in the entire world, and I know that she is actually watching at this exact same moment.
Yes, honey, I know too.
So I'm a little concerned about the bulldozerness of this question, but I am wondering what it is like to be in a family where there are three persons identified on the spectrum, and I don't think your wife is identified, right? She hasn't really identified or hasn't been diagnosed.
Only admits to sensory issues.
Right. So what is it like to try to run a family where there are three people who do have these sensitivities and do, I mean, I know that you have a perspective on this, so maybe you could speak her part for a brief second. I wouldn't want you to speak, I don't want you to speak for her. Wait a second. Oh, there goes his phone. No.
Oh, crap. I was hoping she'd call. Tell me the answer, honey.
I don't want you to speak for her, but I want you to, maybe from your perspective, that the appreciation or the understanding that you've gained.
Well, from her and I talking, and from us doing these kinds of panels before, I can recall, or at least somewhat recall, some of her answers. Though it's not fair she's not here to actually give the answer to this question. I think she feels outgunned. I think she feels outnumbered. She certainly feels overwhelmed, because if the three of us are having sensory or emotional issues, and we're really yelling and screaming at each other, and the kids are throwing objects, and I'm barking, she starts crying. Well, who wouldn't start crying? And she's probably the strongest person I've ever met in my life. You know, she's really handled me quite well for a long time, but we get really, really intense sometimes at the Gauthier house. And at the same time, it could stop suddenly, boom. And there could be this hugging, weeping moment of all of us saying, we're really, really sorry. We're really, really sorry, Mom. And we're hugging her and kissing her. And then the kids and I will run out and, you know, try to get out of the place and come back with flowers, or try to clean up the house, or whatever it is we socially need to do to apologize, though I think all of us are clueless on exactly what that means. We'll try, at least.
Is the microphone on?
It,
Microphone's not working. There's one right up here. I'll get this. That better? Good. So that brings me to part of my work, and so I'm a developmental guy, and I work with kids on the spectrum, adults on the spectrum. I'm having trouble. I'm killing microphones. On the spectrum, and I never work with kids or adults without. See if it works for you. That's what
I think, well, does this work? Hello? Hello? Well, that worked.
Okay. So maybe we should only have one on at a time. I'm on. A little bit. A little bit? A little bit? Can you guys hear this now? It's okay? Okay. Yeah. So I never work with kids when I don't work with the families as well. And the way that I work is called the Developmental Individual Difference Relationship-Based Model. It's Stanley Greenspan's model. It's floor time, essentially. And part of that model talks about how when you are in an actual relationship with somebody, that's the relationship-based piece, you have to co-regulate. So co-regulation means that, we're going to describe now what Chris was just describing. Co-regulation means that when someone in the relationship is going up, it is the partner who has not yet lost control to be the one who can come back down. So you heard Dr. Herbert say this morning, if you were able to see that great keynote this morning, it was beautiful, talk about being the calming presence in the room. Now, I'm not saying that you can always be the calming presence in the room. Obviously, we all have wants and needs. We have desires. We get blown up. We get upset. We lose our ability to function, and we need help and support. But if you are trying in a relationship, this is what relationship, in my opinion, means, and you are both getting worked up, if you are the person who doesn't happen to be the one who is getting totally blown up, it is your job to attempt to go, whoa, calm down. It's okay. Of course, if you say calm down to somebody who's fully upset like that, you're going to get punched. But say it metaphorically. It's like, oh. So very often, and I will give you an example. So if there's a kid who I'm working with who is really worked up and has dropped developmentally and to the way that I think of things, dropped to a level where they're just not, they're just so dysregulated they're not available, I would come onto the scene, and instead of going, oh, what's going on, what's going on, come on, it's like, oh. So I take away the language and I back down a little bit just to be this sort of supportive presence. And my image in my head is of, I always carry Dr. T. Barry Brazelton in my brain. I don't know. Those of you who know Barry Brazelton, he's 96 now, and a lot of your parents raised you by watching his television program in the 1970s and 80s where he had kids running around on the stage. And his whole thing is, oh, boo, 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 boo. And going back and forth with the baby. And that's always my image for co-regulating people, is I just want to be that thing. So I'm wondering if you're in a situation where there are a lot of people who are carrying sensitive sensory issues or are carrying other challenges and who are having trouble regulating, what happens when it sort of just everyone spirals up? I think you sort of talked about the final group hug, but what happens before that? How do you get out of that when the family's just spiraling like crazy?
Well, I think you brought up a really good point about co-regulation, and I'll tell you, I never heard this until we had gotten into floor time. But Jackie and I always had a rule that only one, and this was before kids, that only one of us could freak out at a time. And so on occasion, one of us will be enlightened enough to be able to tell the kids or the other one, okay, one freaks out at a time. Don't follow down the road. So recently, my son has been really struggling, and my daughter wants to get some feedback or has having her own sensory issues. So my job is to let mom take care of Caleb, and I just scoop my daughter up and say, okay, we got to back off. We got to keep this calm. We got to let Caleb have his moment. I know you're not feeling great, so you and I are just going to sit and we're going to hold and just keep it calm. Doesn't matter what's happened, but it does require intentionality, to be able to do that. And if you're not in that place, if you have sensory issues, if you're upset from work, if your digestive system is all out of whack because you ate the wrong food or whatever, it's almost impossible to do that. And so for a family to accelerate up into that explosive moment, it's pretty easy to do.
You bring up a lot of, there's a million issues here, and we'll try to touch on them. But if I don't get to the issue that you sort of favor and want to ask about, I wish that you would please raise your hand and ask the question. So one of the things that really struck me this morning in Dr. Herbert's lecture was do half as much in twice the time. And we're in this crazy age where if you are in a family where there are two adults at the head of the family, you are probably both doing the very best you can to put enough work hours in so that you can keep the family solvent, because things are a challenge these days. And so both of you are working, and both of you are trying to raise a child at the same time, being totally strapped and stressed. The question is, what happens to a family when a therapist like me comes along and says, okay, or like Stanley Greenspan, and says, okay, mommy, okay, daddy, you want to do DIR floor time? Now you have to do 6 sessions at night. Or if you're going to have to do all kinds of extra additional work after your regular work hours. And so you walk into a home where you are additionally working. So what happens there? How does that, I know some of the answers, but for you particularly, what happens there?
I'll answer it not just in the particular, but in the families I've talked with over the years. The phrase paraphrased is, you've got to freaking be kidding me, right? But we're all willing to do it because these are our babies. Like, what other choice do you have? You don't have another choice, right? And if you're in the situation that my wife and I are in, we live in northern Utah. We're not from Utah. Our families are nowhere near us. My parents are 2.5 days away in a car ride. We have no support network. It's just us. So we have to find a way to do this. We're not Mormon, so we don't have access to the Mormon church and the Mormon church community. We're actually not connected to any church because the churches around there don't believe anything that we're even remotely close to what we believe. So it's really, really hard. I mean, in some ways, I think we're in that hard network situation. But if you do have that, get those folks to help you. Do not forge this alone. Get all of the help you can, even if it's for 20 minutes, so you can sit outside and you can listen to the wind blow through a tree. But for the love of God, those of you who are social workers and counselors and therapists, do not tell mom, quote, go take a bubble bath. I swear my wife was going to slug one lady one day.
I will be sure never to say that again. So I think there's also something that, I want to continue on with the challenges that are faced by doing therapies with kids in addition to the work thing. I really do advocate for families to do a lot of the work with kids rather than having the therapist doing a lot of the work. I actually think, from my perspective, the DIR floor time model, this is a family-based therapy, and this is, sometimes parents see it as a burden. I can tell you a brief story. The family went to go see my friend Stanley Greenspan, and they were playing, and they were doing a great job, and they were playing, and they were drenched with sweat, and they thought, oh, yeah, we just nailed it. And Dr. Greenspan said, oh, that's great. now do 100% harder, right? So it's really a challenge. It's really an amazing challenge, and it's a challenge of energy and things like that. So maybe some of you have ideas. I know that you are a clinical social worker, so maybe you have a question related or something you want to add to this. Let me bring you the mic.
Let me support something that he just said. The reason it's important that we do it as the family is because there's this really amazing guy I heard talk yesterday who said, we were not born as gazelles. We did not jump up on our 4 feet and run off to go eat grass. It was him. We are cradled by our parents. We're made to be social creatures. And we are made to have our moms and our dads, or hyper moms and hyper dads, the adopteds, do this with us. Otherwise, we're isolated and abandoned creatures. Psychologists have done monkey tests where if they don't have a real touch, a real human, a real physical thing, these poor little creatures just grow up to be these tiny, pathetic little things. It's sad. We don't want to do that to human beings.
Just one last thought on that. I mean, they have the failure to thrive that you see in hospitals with infants, and if you look at the orphanages in third world countries, that they don't have the staffing or resources.
Yeah.
Exactly like what you just said. My question, though, however, was when you were speaking to the effect of, are you freaking kidding? But there are kids will do it. Okay. I work with a lot of families. Some are quite complex. 2 cases that come to mind, and I'm not going to give too many details that would identify anything, but enough information that you guys have the picture. One family is the father has severe bipolar, isolates himself in his room most of the time because he has real hard time self-regulating. Probably has spectrum stuff mixed in there too. The kiddos, they have 6 kids. Of those 6 kids, 4 of them are officially diagnosed with spectrum disorders, and 2 of them are diagnosed with bipolar, with the 3rd likely to be diagnosed with bipolar, and the one that's one of the 2 that haven't been diagnosed spectrum is starting to be suspected of. Mom is exhausted, and she's kind of the glue of the family. And unfortunately, when she's trying to regulate things in the household and Dad comes out of the room, he comes out very explosively. And he has tried to do therapy. He's come a long ways. I don't think these are bad people by any means. But unfortunately, he says, what if this is as good as it gets for me? What if I can't do this any better? You guys are saying that I have to model, good behavior. What if I can't, And I have another family where mom just is really struggling to get the diagnosis, has very high expectations of her 14-year-old child, doesn't understand when he comes across very blunt and often hurts her feelings or seems disrespectful to her, and then she explodes. And then, of course, then it's on. It just escalates and goes up and up and up. And that's led to her being punched in the nose, him running from the home. But she doesn't seem to get... possibly out of our own defense mechanisms and struggling with acceptance of this disorder, because unfortunately he was diagnosed late in life. He had been in treatment for 7 years at the local mental health center before he came to me, and I said, I'm pretty sure that's Asperger's. Why don't you get tested at KU Med to confirm it, but I'll be happy to work with you. He got tested at KU Med, and of course it was. But so she has her own struggle with, gosh, this, why didn't someone catch this earlier? What do I do with it now? So I have these very difficult families that are struggling with what to do with all this. So that's my question. Any recommendations, thoughts, anything that could help me or these families?
Well, yeah, I have a million thoughts. So, and there are a lot of questions in there. So let's see if I can. I have a very simple mind. I think of things very simply because otherwise I get overwhelmed and confused, and I'm of no use at all. So. I know that it has a pejorative meaning to be simple-minded, but I think that you're talking about a family that is overwhelmed. They were overwhelmed as individuals. They had signs over their heads that said, I'm looking for another overwhelmed individual with whom to have a relationship. They got married, and now they've been given a quadruple dose, right? But my way of working with kids who are identified on the spectrum or somewhere not neurotypical is the exact same way that I would work with a person who was having real trouble and struggling and had the bipolar diagnosis and was in his room. And it's the same way that I work with everybody, right? People, human beings all want to be related to and understood. And so I think it is possible that you're a skilled professional. I think it is possible to get what Dad loves about who he is and what he can love about his relationship to the kids, which may be he really likes throwing his kids in the air and bouncing them on the bed, and there's a physicality that he really likes, hates the other junk, but really loves that stuff. Or really loves, there are people who just love to hike or orienteer and can be out with their kids or could be out with their family or could have this, the crazy parallel relationship that men tend to like when they're sitting in a football stadium and, in this case, they're watching the Chiefs and they're sitting side by side and almost nothing is going, it doesn't look to most people like something's going on between them, but in fact, this is the relationship that they can have because this thing's in front of them, or throwing the ball. So there's pieces that this guy loves. And when you can identify the juice for this guy so that he can understand, the parts that you actually like, the parts that are delicious to you, are the parts that are therapeutic for your kid. Because, your kid's we're gonna spend a lot of money on occupational therapy, or you're gonna bounce them, throw them, spin them around, go down to the playground with them, knock them, roughhouse, tickle, do all the things that you like and wanted to do anyways, but everybody told you, oh, stop doing that. Or, you can take them to the Chiefs game, or you can go out and throw a ball around, and that's actually really useful. So, I think when people begin to feel understood and begin to understand that what they have has real value. Look, the other part is if they're there's a point at which little munchkins need the kind of thing and the kind of relationship that dads have. Very early on, I am sort of prejudiced in the direction of mommies, right? This little tiny infant kind of stuff. But kids do need the thing that dads tend to like to offer. And when we can bring dads in, we can do it. This sort of brings up for me the idea that this is extremely stressful and families fall apart and families separate. And then we find very often that mommies are the primary caregiver and that dads have separated. And in those situations, in therapy situations, I always say, Mommy, even if this is going to be difficult, we have to bring Daddy back in. It doesn't matter whether you're married. It doesn't matter what the relationship. We're going to have to figure out a way, in the same way that you're going to find a way for this guy, we're going to bring Daddy back in. Because there are certain things that can be provided that'll be really useful here. And besides which, kids like relationships with their dads. I'm going to go get that microphone.
I'll say it from the explosive dad experience, because I do have sensory issues and the kids can freak me out, and I will hide, for periods of time. And boy, my poor wife, she gets left alone and she gets mad. We work on radical forgiveness for the things we do wrong to each other, but we also work on radical understanding. She needs me in the moment. Dang it, I'm going to swallow it, and I'm going to go up there, and I'm going to make sure I got her back covered, and I'm going to take those kids out of there so she can depressurize. That's my responsibility, right? I'm dad. I don't get to run away. I don't believe in dads who run away. That's not cool. If the marriage can't work, fine. Have that co-relationship, respectful co-relationship. But you don't get to run away.
Okay, so I handed the microphone to someone else. Could you just basically give us a little background
Yep.
and then go ahead?
I am an occupational therapist. I'm also a mom of a kid on the spectrum. I have 4 kids total. They're all 2 years apart. And I was going to say the best thing for me, my husband works long hours. So he's like leaves at 7 and doesn't get home till 9 every night usually. So it's basically a single parent as far as doing the kids. And being not a therapist myself, there was a lot of stuff that I did. We did floor time and things on our own. But the best thing that I came up with was whenever my main thing was always keeping my son engaged, my third son, is just I always wanted him to be in the moment. I didn't want to give him that chance to kind of go in space. And so it was constantly, you know, where's he at? What's he doing? And between the years when he was 3 and 5, we basically just hired some higher aged high school kids in our neighborhood to come over and not necessarily do therapy with them. I mean, I would educate them on different things, but just to keep him engaged. And they would go in the basement and just play. And then that was from 4 to 6 every night was we did homework with the other kids. I made dinner. And I didn't have to stress that he was not getting what he needed. And that in itself was not that I was taking a bubble bath or relaxing, but it was just the knowledge of knowing that he was getting what he needed while I was still able to do everything else was enough of the stress reliever for me to make it through.
Well, I think that's a great solution if it's available.
Yeah.
And sometimes I suggest that to people, but those folks are hard to find. I mean, they're gold when you do find them, and they're really, really helpful. But there are situations where they're not available. And so I just want to say that it is possible, although it's a challenge, to turn everyday activities into those engaged activities. Now, if you have 4 kids on the spectrum at home, let me just say I'm not so crazy as to believe that you could do this all the time. It's like I wanted to say that, but if you have 1 kid on the spectrum at home and you know you're really a family that's got a lot of challenges and you have to be working long hours and there are a lot of things going on, you can turn home activities into floor time activities. And that's, I think, when people say that floor time is too challenging, it's too much to do, and I want to say, but folding the laundry, someone else suggested this yesterday, folding the laundry actually is an activity that you can turn into open and closing useful circles. Cooking dinner is one of those things that families traditionally did together, and you can still do together. Now, it will take you 4 times as long to cook your dinner, just so you know. I just want to warn you.
And that's where the other kids came into trouble.
Well, yeah. But it is doable. And so, I mean, people have been just pushing and prompting me to write a book about how do you do that. And so I think this probably would be a really good idea. Here's home activities that you're going to do anyways that you can turn into therapeutic activities that would be really useful. Yeah.
The laundry's perfect. I mean, that's something me and the kids do all the time. Like probably many of your clients, the laundry builds up, right? I run it through the wash, the dryer, it gets dumped, and it builds, and it builds, and it builds, and it builds. And I'm sure pretty much everybody lives that way. But, you know, what we do is I go downstairs with the kids, and we divide them into sortable stacks that are based on the categories. So we categorize the laundry in subcategories so that then when mom comes down to fold, it's not quite as crazy, and then we're responsible for folding our own, and mom gets pretty much all the rest of it, whatever the chaff is left, but it's not usually chaff, it's most of it. So, yeah, it does work.
That's a good idea. I'm going to steal that. Will you pass her that microphone, please?
I work primarily with people. Is it not working?
There you go, put it up.
Is that better? Yeah. Okay. I work primarily with people who are on Medicaid and Medicare. So I'm talking about people generally in Missouri who have incomes under $1,200 a month and usually no public housing. And the people that I work with often are single mothers, but sometimes worse. They have a partner or a family member that they're living with who is actively hostile to their autistic child, because that is creating a burden on the larger family unit or the boyfriend or whoever it is that they're living with that is causing problems for the larger family. And those people won't come into therapy with me. And often I can't even get permission, because I do home visits, that I can't get in the home either. So I can't access those people. And I've racked my brains and I'm stuck. How do I help those people teach? Because autism is not my primary. I primarily work with people with severe and persistent mental illness and trauma. But I end up with a lot of co-occurring. And I don't know how to reach those people I can't get to through the person who is willing to come to me and help them help their child.
Okay, so let me, the general question is that we're talking about really challenged, generally, of the kids, and then a hostile partner, right? A hostile other party, right? Okay, so let's just generalize it a little bit more, so we're not answering just a specific question. So what do you do when you are faced with, if you're a clinician or you're somebody who's in the support services, how are you going to help a family like that? So my general tenet is you help who's in front of you, right? So I'm a great believer in human beings, right? And I'm a great believer in people being able to rise. And if you help the person who you are lucky enough to have contact with, even if it's someone who's got extreme challenges in socioeconomic status and other areas, and you work with them, and I always think, I sort of think developmentally all the time. So you're developmentally at this level, and you and I are going to work on increasingly going back and forth and opening and closing and continuous circles and rise to this next more abstract level. That will change the other relationship too. That actually changes relationships. One motivated person in a relationship changes things. And one really motivated person can change all of society. Right? In fact, I think isn't it Margaret Mead who said that never doubt that a small group of committed individuals can change the world. In fact, that's the only way it's ever occurred. And I think when you work really, and I know that you will work really well with individuals, when you work with that individual and get them to understand what a relationship actually is, that you and I have a relationship. I don't get my needs met by you because the society pays me, but I am in a relationship with you. I care about you, and I am working with you sincerely. I am sincerely present for you. When that person begins to understand what an actual relationship is, that will change what's going on with the other third party. It just will. You either don't tolerate it or you help them to change too. They will change as well. I see it again and again and again that one person in a system changes the whole system. So my answer is work with what you have in front of you. That's the definition of karma, right? Life throws you junk, just keeps throwing you junk, and you deal with it, the thing happening in front of you effectively each time. Just the next thing comes, deal with it effectively. The next thing, and that will change everything. So I know that's sort of a Pollyanna way to think of the world, but that's how I think of the world.
Want to lose faith because that person is coming to you with their frustrations, with that person that they're living with, who is deliberately sometimes undermining because they don't believe philosophically in what's being done.
Well, so if you're going to take your paycheck, you're not allowed to lose faith. Because the paycheck replaces your emotional needs, right? You're not allowed. It's not about you. You're not allowed to get your emotional needs met. So therapists don't get their emotional needs met by their patients. They get paid, and that means that then they come back the very next day, and they bring back all of the loving. That's what If you have to think of anything, I always think of the book Where the Wild Things Are, because that's the story of where the wild things are. Right, that someone can act egregiously, and yet the next time you encounter them, you bring them the warm dinner, right? And my dinner was still warm, even though I acted badly. That's the role of mommies, that's the role of daddies, and that's the role of professionals working in the field. So my staff always calls that, Gil's giving the waffle speech, right? So that even if a kid is really out of control, the very next time you encounter him, you bring the waffles. That's just the way it is.
I'm going to give you an activist answer. It's the Pollyanna. And I don't often like it when people use this word hope because they mean it very softly, but I mean it deeply and passionately. You have to teach them hope. And it's an inspiration. And you have to be the vehicle of that inspiration. So when I'm out working with environmental groups or families who are dealing with environmental impact issues, or families who I've photographed here, just that conversation, just that human respect, just that, look, you're not alone. There are a lot of people out there who are struggling. Have some faith, have some hope in who you are and why you have a purpose in the universe. That can be that point. It's not easy. I grew up around a lot of poverty. I work around a lot of poverty, and I have my entire life, so I understand those families pretty well. You can't ever give up. You have to be the foundation of that for them, no matter what.
Have to constantly keep refilling in order to be able to bring it in, and that is the hardest part.
Yeah. It is hard. It is very hard to keep refilling that bucket because my wife teaches a preschool kindergarten. She's the director of a preschool kindergarten, and she teaches the kids, it's the bucket theory. You either took something out of their bucket or you put something into their bucket. Unfortunately, socioeconomics and education, it's a lot of bucket stealing instead of bucket giving. And so maybe that's a strategy, is teaching them how to gift. Like gift cultures, you don't typically find this stuff happening as much. So start with the theory of gift culturing.
Yeah, so I had at the Rebecca School, where I'm lucky enough to be the clinical guy and also one of the founders. We have a really young and dedicated staff, right? So we're talking about 25-year-olds who entered the field, and there's 120 of them, and I run a mindfulness group for them, some of them, and the discussion has turned to life with purpose, and that's how people do it, right? They understand that they're getting underpaid and that it's very difficult and that they're under stress all the time, and they go out and we're in the middle of New York City, so all of their friends who graduated from college are now the $200,000 a year young execs and hot shots, and they go and meet those guys and they say, why on earth are you doing that? And it's a life with purpose, right? They see that there's a purpose. And for me, that's the juice, right? That's how you just keep coming back. You wanted to say?
I'm a marriage. Is that
I don't know if it is or not, but
I don't need it.
but the people online want to hear it. So let me bring you. Go ahead, try it. Let me bring you this one. Here, try this one.
All right. Thanks.
See how it goes.
So I'm a marriage and family therapist, and the question I have is I have somehow gotten a lot of Asperger's and autism kid referrals, but when doing the initial assessment, the families will come in, and on some occasions, frequently, I see tics, nervousness, anxiety disorders in usually the fathers especially. So there's a lot of symptoms sitting there in front of me. And as I try to work with the family and start explaining the internal world of the kids so that the parents can start, identifying and getting a little softer in that relationship, I've had at least over the past 6 months, 3 fathers kind of have difficulty because they go home and start seeing themselves. And it's never been diagnosed. So these highly successful, intelligent people start having these internal cracklings, which feels like uninformed consent to me. So how to manage that, I am just looking for any feedback on how to manage that, because they are my patient as a family system, but here they are getting slammed with a diagnosis unintentionally by default.
Well, I'll answer that as a dad who had to struggle with that. You have to look at the ghosts in your closet, because if you don't, then you can't help your child, and you're going to reenact all the nightmares of your childhood that put those ghosts in your closet in the first place. So I had to turn, again, I said earlier, art trained me to be introspective, but I had such blind sides to certain things in my family of origin that it took this to suddenly open up the doors and to answer a lot of questions. It took this for me to look at my own family and realize, wow, I wish the government would please fund a research project where they looked at not only me, my children, my parents, my siblings, my aunts, my cousins, my uncles, the whole 9 yards, because I'm suspecting that we have a massive genetic chain of Asperger's on both sides. Now, I'm not a psychologist or a therapist. I'm an activist and a parent. But I see those traces like footsteps in sand. As the further you go back, the more they're going to disappear. But it's about empowering them, letting them understand that it really will set them free, and ultimately it will set their child free. Because we have a child, and what we want is a better world for them than we had. And that's the first step to it.
So I'm kind of interested. Were you knocked off your pins when you sort of realized for the very first time, oh my gosh, this is me too? Like, did that send you into a spin, and then maybe that would inform what a therapist could do that would be useful or helpful?
I wouldn't say it threw me into a spin. Again, I've sort of got this existence before of, oh, hey, look at this radical thing I've been doing, and all right, well, you just move forward with it. So I had already a buffer built into me for it, so it didn't really quite knock me. But yeah, it was a little bit of a surprise. And certainly, and I will tell you, the first time anybody accused my daughter of autism was my mother-in-law, and I was enraged, right? She has not got a death sentence. I refuse to have my daughter have a death sentence. What a dumb thinking. Actually, it was a naive thinking, right? That for me was the tailspin moment.
So are you thinking of running a father group?
Well, I've got a father group and a mother group, and it's just so difficult for them because they have done so well in life. They found their niche, but it's the relationship when mother says, "I always wondered why when I was crying you would turn and walk away."
Check one.
For 16 years.
We have to stop macho culture.
Yeah.
We can be strong men, and we can learn to cry. We do not always have to be the rocks. Any rock that is too strong crumbles and breaks under pressure. It will not last forever. And we are human beings.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think in your work with the kid, you're going to bring the folks in anyways. Mm-hmm. And so there's your chance, right? This system is going to change, and as the kid begins to rise, and as they begin to understand, oh, some of the things about me which have made me so successful are also really useful to my kid, and that's how you'll glue them all together and help them understand. Oh, I'm not perfect, but I am really exactly the right dad for this kid, and we're going to work it out.
Yeah. Thank you.
Other people who want to ask questions? Are there other people who have questions? Let me run them. Will you go back? Thanks. Oh, now we're getting other people to do our work. See, that's efficient right there.
Thank you. This may be out of scope, but as a senior with Asperger's, is there anything you can say about what's different about treatment for adults with Asperger's or with ASD?
So when I think about the way human beings develop, I'm a lifespan kind of guy. And so I really think my greatest development has been between the ages of 50 and 58, which is where I am now. I've made the best progress, and changed the most, and made my brain is actually continuing to develop. So when I think developmentally, I don't think there's not a methodological difference, but there is a content difference, right? So if I am playing with a kid who's lying on the floor, and or a daddy is playing with his kid and doing the tickle game, right? I'm coming, right? That game. That's sort of advanced version of peekaboo, right? I'm doing the same thing with someone who's 70. But what I'm doing is we're talking about areas of really unique interest and something that I may, you as the person in the relationship with me might really want to talk about. It's a really deep interest. But I don't really want to only uncover the factual pieces of that deep interest. I also want to understand and have you begin to understand why you're saying the things that you're saying or why you're interested in those things. Or I just did a therapy with a kid the other day where he, I'm sure some of you have children like this, just are deeply devoted to comic books. And they have a Marvel world and a DC world, right? And never the twain shall meet. And he was talking about a a lot of things which were purely factual, and you can't argue the facts, and blah 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 blah. And then he said something about Superman and Lois Lane, and I was able to ask him about that relationship and how is it that an alien and a human are having a relationship like that, and and he began to wonder what is interesting about that, and we developed a whole realm of things that were not about the facts, right? So the therapy for me and the way that I work with people doesn't change. I don't really want to know much factual material. It's not, we can look that up. The internet has sort of supplanted that. What I want to know is, I want to instill the spirit of inquiry in adults and children, which is, you have an inner life that I'm interested in, I deeply want to know about, and you might not want me to be a part of it, but slowly but surely in the context of a relationship, we're going to do it. So I don't think it changes very much. In the hands of a skilled individual, and I'm not saying that I'm that person, but in the hands of a skilled individual, it's always the same work, but it's following the lead of the person and what their interests are. Does that answer your question at all?
It helps. Thank you.
Thank you.
Occupational therapy, the bouncy ball, the swing. Why not? Your body is your body, and it has gravity. Let your body talk to you.
Yeah, no, I would go out and ride your bike. Go motor through the world. I think it's really useful. Okay, here we go. I'm going to move my microphone. Hold on a minute. Remember Donahue?
For the video who missed it, he said, "Do you remember Donahue?"
Thank you. My question is more about the siblings. When you have a child having meltdowns, anger outbursts in the house, just some ideas about good ways to explain this to 10-year-olds and 6-year-olds that are there and might take it personally or think the anger is about them. Just some tips about how to deal with the siblings, please.
Well, did you see the sibling panel? Really beautiful, right? I mean, what a lovely group of human beings was sitting on that stage. It was really beautiful. And also touching, really touching. It's not easy to be the sib. So there are a lot of things to say here. One of the little girls talked about how her mommy did special days with her and took her out. Very lovely. But I think that's not the entire issue, right? The entire issue is, look, I want to love this kid. And yet, that's kind of cruel, what they said, or how they treated me, or how they rejected me. It's the same feeling that all of us have when someone who we deeply want to love rejects us. It's really hard, and then rejects us again, and then rejects us again. It's kind of the same answer we just talked about here, right? But one of the things I try to do with SIBs is to help them to understand that everybody has differences. This is a real difference, but you also have differences that you like to have indulged. There's nothing lovelier than when mommy indulges daddy in his idiosyncrasies and is kind to him, or when I take care of you in a particular way, or you understand how I like things. So it is about differences, and the taking things personally part is a very sophisticated thought, right? This is, if you're talking about a 13-year-old, it's really hard for a 13-year-old not to take things personally. Their brains are designed to only take things personally, right? I mean, they take everything personally. A kid at 9 and 10, they're in the chumship stage, and they're not taking everything quite so personally yet, although they might really feel hurt. And then when they get older again, they'll rise up to the level where they cannot take things quite as personally again. It's just really hard. I mean, again and again, you hear about families where the mommy and the daddy have to spend a lot of time with the kid who needs a lot of attention, and that puts kids who are more independent in a position where they don't get as much attention. So I think the SIBs told you, pay more attention to me. And also, I would just have you talk about differences. These are differences, and you have differences too. And I want to understand your differences in the same way that I know it's really hard. I'm going to ask you to try to understand his.
Thank you.
Not great advice, but the best I can do. Have other questions? Other questions? Nobody wants the mic?
Hi, I am a professional actress and teaching artist, and I work with a school where I'm the only arts exposure my students have. I work with one classroom of K through third, and then fourth through sixth, middle school, high school, etc. And it's generally a very wide range of ability on the spectrum and other very wide range of age. Sometimes I have a kindergartner in with an eighth grader. But just to kind of pick your brain, could you give me an example of what might be one of your favorite arts activities in a group situation?
All right, so I'm not so prescriptive, right? So I actually, my take is the way that I work is I want to know what the kid is interested in. And so I know that classes have demands, and so you would have to do things that are on demand in order to meet class needs, but presenting materials and letting kids go where they're going to go, and then using the materials as a way to open and close circles in a relationship. Now, I like expression, and I think expression is, beautiful. I want children to be the poets of their inner lives. I want adults to be the poets of their inner lives. That's what language is for. That's what our back and forths are for. But I also, in the process, when I have a professional in the room, I don't want a kid to be working alone, right? So there has to be a way to get people to go back and forth. Now, if you're one person and 18 people in a room, that means you're going to have to really be beautiful, and it's going to be like a jazz performance where you're going to go and scaffold two kids together, three kids who have a shared interest, a kid who's 18, a kid who's, 12, and a kid who's 5 can all be working on similar themes in their own creative way, right? And you can point out the similarities. Oh, you all seem to be working abstractly. Look at how this is. Oh, it sort of means, you can do that. And it takes, you just rise to the highest game. But I don't do projects with people. I want people to, my goal is when people are expressing themselves, I want to understand it and then use that to help them move up developmentally. It's kind of, I'm a pushy guy. I'm not so, I like expression, but when I'm in the room, it's going to have to be with me.
Thank you.
I can answer it as an artist if you want, and an art professor.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
I do a lot of process art with my kids. It's not product art. It is not representational. It's simply the experience of the moment. It's looking at materiality. There may be a conversation afterwards. My kids are really high functioning. So we talk about, well, what do they observe? What happened when a marble moved across the acrylic paint versus across the oil paint? Look at the separation. If you use watercolor with sea salt or table salt, it creates these beautiful kind of star effects. Well, what happened? Why did it work that way? Why didn't it work that way? Or, in our living room, we could easily be doing, splash paintings like Jackson Pollock, just because it's just fun, right? Or mud. But as a teacher, one of the things that I do with my students, and I really would love to see this happen more for our community, is collaborative projects where the work is partially produced simultaneously on one large piece together, letting people do what they naturally do. That creates teamwork, which is going to be a hard thing for most of us to do. But the other one is exchange a piece to another person. Let them emboss themselves onto it. And you round robin this as it goes. That is going to be extremely difficult circles of relationship, because suddenly I have to, as a person on the spectrum, surrender my authorship. And we don't like that. It's our world, our truth. But boy, if you can do it as a team and say, hey, my friend over here, he did something really beautiful on this. That's awesome, right? And critique as an artist, the conversation, if you have communication skills, is also part of that feedback. Don't just let them make it, but make it and communicate about it, talk about it. And if it's about getting skills of visual communication moving forward, which is different, art therapy is not about that, but art is, then you have to start talking about that intentionality. What was my meaning? Then the person next to him says, well, I don't understand that because that's not what I get from this. And it's about a really respectful relationship. Again, it's that height of functionality or not. Yeah.
I was just going to say, we have done in the past ink blocks, so how they take a piece of computer paper, folding it in half, and doing. But then in a circle, having the kid who made it stand up and say, "This is what I made. This is what I see. Is what I think is." Then having the other kids go around and try to identify what they perceive the ink block was like, and having then the child be open to the fact that other kids have a different perspective.
So without the microphone, most of the people didn't hear that, but it was an art project suggestion. So you guys should meet up after this and come up with ideas, brainstorm. Okay, I want to thank you all. What an honor to be in front of you. I deeply appreciate it. I'm just going to say my website, which is drgiltippy.com, drgiltippy.com, and there's nothing on there for sale. So it really just links to different things that might be cool to you. And it also links to Chris's website. So, Chris, you want to say your website?
It's just my full name, ChristopherGauthier.com. It's GAUTHIER.com, which, no, there's nothing for sale, but you'll see my artwork, you'll see the blog, you'll see my teaching examples, things along those lines.
Thank you.
Thank you.